everybody, this is Afanur Adonai, also known as Michael, coming to you with another podcast here at 93 Theory and Practice. So today, we're going to start with going over Liber OZ. And no, that doesn't mean we're going to be going over the Book of Oz as far as the Wizard of Oz. Although, I don't know, there might be some correlation to that. So, we're just going to jump right in, right after we do our normal stuff. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is, this is the second podcast, number 2. We are the Hokmah on the Tree of Life of podcasts. So, just an overview. Last podcast, we talked about myself, kind of my history, where I'm coming from, just so we got a better idea of, who's behind the microphone. I'm going to have to apologize if my voice sounds a little different today. The allergies here in Texas are insane. I guess you could say the pollen, mold, whatever else is out there is just rampant. So I am under strong attack. So we're going to continue with our reading from the Book of the Law. Remember, we're doing 5 verses. So we're going to start at verse 6 of the first book of the law. So here we go. Be thou Hadit, my secret center, my heart and my tongue. Behold, it was revealed by Ibos, the minister of Hor Parkrat. The cobs is in the coup, not the coup, in the cobs. Worship then the cobs, and behold my light shed over you. Let my servants be few and secret. They shall rule the many and the known. That's good. So, we're going to speak about Liber OZ. Liber OZ, you can kind of think of it like, what is that word? The Rosicrucians would tack them to things around town to let people know that the mystics are back. The manuscript, or I can't remember. But essentially, this is like a little thelemic poster reminding you of the liberties of which we share in this new aeon. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into it, and we'll start to expand as the Spirit wills. So it starts off. This is just a printed version. It's very easy to get off the internet. I recommend you do. Frame it, keep it somewhere. But it should look something like that. You'll have a seal of the beast right there, representing the pinnacle. Also representing, basically, this is the manifested work of Crowley. So this is a lot of magic in theory and practice that he's accomplished, condensed into a tangible physical reality that he can then share with other people. That's my interpretation of the Oz seal there. I'm very sure there's a little bit more to it. But find someone who's a little bit more deep into the OTO to find that out. So, it starts off with a couple quotes. It says, "The law of the strong, this is our law, and the joy of the world." You can interpret that however you want. That's from the Book of the Law. My personal interpretation, which is in no way to be regarded as any way truth, unless somehow it strikes a chord with you. Strike, strike the master chord, draw, draw the flaming sword, crown, child, and conquering lord, Horus Avenger. Sorry. It's a mantra that's in my head a lot. So yeah, the law of the strong. To be willed, to have will is strength. It's to understand the inner forces of your own being, and then to utilize those to manifest desired results. So this is for the strong, and this is true joy, not the shallow joys that I think Nuit was speaking of in the first book, but true ecstasy here on earth. Actually, that might not have been that book. Either way, next line is, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. It's pretty, if you study a little bit of the Lema, become pretty self-evident. Thou hast no right but to do thy will. Do that, and no other shall say nay. Now, my personal interpretation of that, of course, would be, if you are truly living your God-given purpose, the reason that you reincarnated, manifested, were born, that if you're doing the exact purpose, the universe, the entire momentum of the universe is behind you. I mean, it's nobody chastises a tree for being a tree. No, we know it's a tree. Well, yeah, we cut them down and turn them into paper, but you understand. Nobody's going to be like, oh, stupid tree, why aren't you a cloud? Nobody does that. Same thing. If you find your true core, your true drive, that wheel that ever turns you, that's your true will. And as long as you're doing that, the universe will not say nay. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have, like, assholes out there that are, like, jealous of you accomplishing things and finding joy in your accomplishments. Yeah, fuck them. So, every man and every woman is a star. Now, of course, you learn in Thelemic theology, if you want to call it that, that we have three primary gods: Nuit, Hadit, Ra, Hor, Quit. The easiest way to understand these, here in America at least, if you have some sort of Christian background, would be the Father, the Mother, and the Son. Nuit, of course, being the feminine component, would be the mother. She encompasses, well, a whole lot of correspondence, but mainly the vastness of space, so the entirety of existence. So, beginning to end, everything. You gotta think of like Saturn. Saturn being the giver of physical reality, of form, that through Saturn the entire manifest, astrological, zodiacal, everything manifested into being physically from us. It's not the originator, but manifests through all that. In that same way, Binah, who is correlative in Saturn as well as the moon, as well as the Earth. So Nuit she is Isis. She is, oh man, I can't even think. She's Hecate. She's Diana. She's all these feminine, maternal components. That encompass basically all of that, just kind of goes into her. But she is what you would think the primal or most archetypal form of that feminine energy. Then you have Hadit, who is the male counterpart. We would think of him as the father, the Logos. He would be fire. So just any patriarchal kind of archetypal god form you can think of, hopefully without any of the kind of weird negative societal connotations to that. There you have Hadit, and then those two opposites are rectified in a third, and that's a child, and that's the son, and that's represented as, well, dual god, but essentially it's Horus, but you have Ra, Hor, Quit, and Hor, Par, Krat. Ra, Hor, Quit being his active outgoing form. You kind of think of it like in the sign of silence, or the sign of the enter and the sign of silence. The sign of the enter is your active form of sending out energy. That would be Hor, Par, Krat. It's actually called Ra, Hor, Quit, whatever. It's actually the sign of Horus. And then you have the sign of silence, which is the sign of Hor, Par, Krat, which is the child, or the babe in the egg, babe in the lotus. It's the infant version, so basically like the innocent version of Horus. And then you have the avenging active version of Horus, and that's the rectified god, and that's found in the sun. So on the tree of life, Hokmah would be innocence, would be Hadit, Binah would be Nuit, and then they rectify in a, I guess, a tangible reality sun for us in the sun, with a spiritual unmanifest version in Da'ath. That's completely aside from what we're talking about. Now, take a little sippy poo here. Ah, that's hot. So now we move on to the actual bulk of Liber OZ. So it says, there is no God but man. Now, this is a point that I like to bring to people when I talk about humanity and God in general. I understand very well the concept of God, of a supreme being who created everything that is, that was, and will become. I understand that concept. But I also understand, as I don't want to get too philosophical here because philosophy isn't my huge thing. But as you all know, Nietzsche said God is dead for a whole bunch of reasons, mainly because God is reliant on man to produce that phenomenon. My whole perspective on that falls a little bit in line with that. I could be wrong about Nietzsche, but essentially my personal interpretation has been animals. Religion seems to be pretty solely isolated to the human species as far as we know. That deep inner sense of spirituality, that self-awareness, is pretty isolated to us. Not one of those people that likes to think that we are a completely isolated creation, that we have no correlation in the actual animal kingdom. If we came from some form of ape or something else, that's perfectly fine with me. It doesn't make any difference practically to me. Or if a supreme deity just kind of popped us into existence, then that's okay as well. Both, when you really meditate and get down to it, are equally ridiculous. But yeah, I've always sort of known that without the consciousness of man, without the observing mental impact that man has on his environment, there would be no room for God. There would be no need for God. Man invented God as a way of understanding things that we couldn't really quite understand. And also, God was kind of a way of us to categorize a series of phenomenon of which we were in awe of. And a lot of people would go farther to say that there is no God. That essentially, there is nothing outside of, there is no experience outside of the human perception. I believe that's something in line with, I guess, the Hindu philosophy, being is that we're all just one big dream of, is it Vishnu? I might be wrong on that one. But essentially, we are gods dreaming. All these are like different ways of viewing your own existence, of making sense of your own existence, of creating your own God story, essentially, where you play some sort of role as either the servant of this God or the God himself. Now, Crowley asserts in Liber OZ that there is no God other than man, which is true. Let's play a little mental game here. These are one of my favorite things to do, little mental games. Let's pretend like there is no humans. There's no one to write down anything, no one to speak, no one to do, no one to affect the environment in a willed way. Now, if God exists and there was no one to, in a sense, witness his existence, then what you have is nothing. You have a singular perspective. On the tree of life, you would have Kether. You have unity. Unity is equal to nothingness. Because it's the dissolution. It's the dissolution of everything into something, but ultimately that something has nothing to reference itself back to, so blah, blah, blah. To become aware, we need a second condition, and that's in Hokmah. It's the Lord of Duality. This is where we basically get the perception of something else. Practically speaking, within the psyche of man, this becomes the conscious awareness of self and other, or self and environment. But of course, this is above the abyss. But in our perception, it becomes basically the structure of everything, dual view, or duality, in a sense. But yeah, there is no God because you are that point. You are the hadit in you is that singular point of perspective, that singular spark and flame that ignites your being. That is basically the source. If you kind of think of it, the universe is like a big black void, and you are a small candle. And your environment and your existence is basically the length that the light reaches out from that candle of what you can perceive and create images within that field of light is basically your reality. But that candle is the truth of the reality. It is the one giving light and life and warmth, but you are the observer. You are the one observing and witnessing that there is a void, there is a candle, and there is a series of phenomena and events that are occurring between the play of the light and the dark. So in that sense, without you, the observer, there is no God, there is no flame, there is no light, there is no hadit, because they are one and the same, essentially. But they aren't mutually exclusive. They are dependent on each other. So, if there is no man, there is no God. Therefore, because man exists, he creates as God. Man really is the creator. He has created for himself his gods. Now, there's probably a lot of people that may have specific faiths and that hold that belief very dearly. Could be a lot of people who are stuck in Venus and cannot get over the devotion of their someone else's made-up God, which is fine. I get it. I mean, if people are allowed to think and do how they will. If you want to believe that there's a creator God, that all of this is created by him and this or her, this entity essentially is what's constantly manifesting or did manifest our reality, and it's our goal to enjoy it or figure it out or whatever. That's a completely okay framework to work in as long as it allows you to be productive in accomplishing your will. But ultimately, I believe the more enlightened view of understanding that man creates his own gods, and in that, man has the ultimate power to create these great, phenomenal archetypes for himself and allow himself to succeed in ways that weren't possible before through these grand archetypes. That's what I believe that speaks of. I would love to know comments or emails what you believe. I mean, please feel free to let me know as long as it's constructive. Let's all try to be adults here and civil because we share this planet and there's no use being a-holes. I don't know where I'm going with that, I don't like mean people. So, we're moving on. This is line 1. It says, man has the right to live by his own law, to live in a way that he wills to do, to work as he will, to play as he will, to rest as he will, to die when and how he will. Now, of course, on the surface level, we can quickly draw some really quick, I guess you could say, civil or societal conclusions from these things. That being, man has the right to live by his own law. But you'll say, but Zafan, we're all supposed to live under the law of our country. We have these civil laws, federal laws, criminal laws that all keep us working together. Well, if you're supposed to be intelligent, you're supposed to understand the environment you work in. In fact, the first degree in pretty much any tradition is generally associated with self-control. It is your initiatory degree, is your neophyte degree. Neophyte means newly planted. It's a very earthly degree. It has to do with finding a common ground in your environment and in yourself, understanding the world in which you live in. So, of course, man has the right to live by his own law, but when you understand the laws of which encompass the reality you're in, so, for instance, I'm in Texas, so we have fairly conservative laws. So, I understand that to be able to fulfill my will effectively, I need to obey certain laws. Now, of course, other laws may not, in a sense, apply practically to who I am or what I am, but at this moment, I don't necessarily find any particular conflict with at least any criminal laws. But remember, this is all you. This is all things you inject. These meanings. Of course, we hope that these are intelligent, well-informed, rational meanings that you're injecting these things, but to each their own. So yeah, man has right to live by his own law. So you ultimately, because you are in control of yourself, do not subjugate yourself to other people's wills in the form of your entire basis of morality is dependent on some structure, either government, or religious, or societal, telling you how to act. You need to find out what the core of your being is, how to express yourself, and then find a way to do that in line with your current environment. Now, if your will is to break every law, by all means do that and spend the rest of your life in prison, if that be your will, or find a place somewhere else that does not have those laws of which you could do those things you wish to without being penalized. Now, if that place does not exist, by all means, try and peacefully create that place, and otherwise reevaluate yourself. And if you cannot find a place on Earth where you can do the weird things you want to do, perhaps you're just crazy. So, to live the way that he wills to do, to live, to have your being, to be what you want, to have the lifestyle you want. I think it's kind of weird because I only have the American perspective of this, but I think a lot of our American culture does share a bit of what we're speaking of here. The fact that you have to live the way you want. You can pretty much adopt necessarily any culture, religion, viewpoint that you want, as long as you're not harming other people or, in a sense, breaking any civil or criminal laws or federal laws. Now, do I 100% agree with, should people honestly be able to live, like truly live? Because here we go, another mind game. Here's a cool thing. Have any of y'all been watching on Netflix? There's a show called Black Mirror. It interests me, one, because it was said Black Mirror, and I was like, ooh, is it about Goetia? No, you stupid nerd. Nothing is about Goetia. No, but it's kind of like a Twilight Zone, where it's each episode is its own condensed little story. And basically what it talks about is different things that we face in our society pertaining to technology, and how that may turn out in the near future. Example would be where everyone's connected to a cell phone and everything and everyone is rated by a five-star system. And depending on your star rating, depends basically where you can live, what you can buy, and all this great stuff. Now, we do have a form of this in our society now. And it's our economic class system, it's our societal system, our cultural system. If you're not American enough, as far as red-blooded by a hot dog, go watch baseball American, you generally are looked down upon by a large chunk of the American population, which is okay, that's fine. That's their beef. But there does come a point where you may live in a country where you cannot honestly be what you want to be. A good example would be, say, like Russia, where women's rights are atrocious. In fact, I think Russia only had, for 6 months, they had if you beat a family member, that was domestic abuse. For 6 months, they had that law, and then it ended. That's it. Could you imagine them in a country where it's completely legal for your family member to viciously beat you on a regular basis, and nobody would do anything about it, just because, it's not a law. Now, of course, being a free individual, essentially, you could do something about it. But, we live in a society where we need help from people. A lot of these people that are being abused in Russia are women, and they can't fight back from these large, burly Russian men. But it just shows that there are places in the world where you cannot live the way you want to, where your reality is dictated by very strict control systems. And I think that's also where gratitude comes in. So like here, I'm very gracious to the fact that, you know, I have a large amount of freedom day to day to do essentially what I want. And had I been born somewhere else, my reality could be completely different. So you need to be grateful for those things and understand that, yeah, if you live in a country where you do have some controls over you that do limit a little bit of what you want to do, sometimes that's okay. That's a sacrifice you have to give. That bit of sacrifice, give that up to a deity. If you love God so much, give that up to him. Unite your suffering with his. Now, of course, work as he will, same thing, to provide for yourself the way you want. Now, of course, this is becoming very self-evident these days. You have people who literally are like digital nomads who travel around the world doing online jobs. You have people whose job is literally to stand in front of a camera like this and talk to people for 20 minutes a day and all that good stuff. There are people who make a living, who are wealthy, talking about being wealthy, who actually don't necessarily do anything themselves or provide a specific service other than talking about other people's specific services. So we live in a very, I would say, Wild West time as far as earning a living. The classic view of the 9 to 5, of investing in a corporation or becoming a part of a corporation, is kind of dying out with the old generation. And we're getting more people who are understanding that, hey, if I can provide a service, a needed service, that enough people will want, I could support myself. I'm not saying that's a particularly tangible goal for everyone, but it's definitely doable. Much more doable now than it was 100 years ago. Well, maybe 150 years ago, I should say. To play as he will, to have fun, to find your joy in whatever you want. Whatever tickles your pickle, go ahead and does it as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. That's essentially it. To rest as he will, to die when and how he will. Now, this is a tough one, because there's a lot of people that may not, or there's a lot of people that would interpret this to say, if I can die when and how I want. So I would say this civil or current societal view with that would be allow assisted suicide, or maybe not assisted suicide, but allow people to kill themselves if they suffer enough. I mean, basically don't make any form of willed death illegal, other than, say, someone who wants to suicide by killing others. That's not right. Unless, of course, I mean, there's always a reason. There's always these specific reasons why certain very unthinkable things need to happen. But essentially just saying, this isn't necessarily for you. Because you as a person, when you find your true will, you will instinctually want to display that, to live it, to inhabit it, to manifest it. But this is for other people who are also trying to do the same. In a sense, don't judge them. They have a right, just like you have a right to be what you are. Everyone else has a right to be what they are. Everyone else is their own star in the company of stars. Now, we all share in the body of Nuit, so we have a common identity in that. But we're ultimately individuals, and we each have our individual trajectories and orbits and wills. So you need to not judge a star by another star or even your own star without expecting the dire consequences. So we move on to line 2. Line 2 is man has the right to eat what he will, to drink what he will, to dwell where he will, to move as he will on the face of the earth. Now, of course, this, if you want to take it, the most surface layer would, of course, be you could eat any diet that you wish. You want to be vegan, sure. I would say the only thing I would have opposition to would be cannibalism, because I think at any respect that's not okay. Just scientifically, just the myriad of things that can happen bad to you. Now, I do also understand there are cultures around the world where when a loved one dies, it is a ritual or a ceremony to cook them and eat them and reabsorb their energies into their own to carry on the spiritual lineage of that ancestor. Sure. But You need to work within the confines of the environment you're in. So no to that. But essentially, yeah, if you want to consume, basically just saying anything that you're going to consume in your body in the form of food or drink, or anywhere that you want to be consumed as a form of being a being within a certain environment of which your energies are expended to further enliven that environment, you're free to choose that. And no one else should have, well, everyone else has the right to say whatever they want, but they shouldn't have the right to stop you from doing that. Essentially, as long as you're not interfering with the wills of others. Which is a side note, because if you truly are doing your true will, you probably won't encounter that resistance as far as on a very tangible way. Now, like I said, you always have a-holes who will try and resist you verbally, but that's air. They are, the fairies can only distract you. They may not necessarily be able to harm you physically, because they're made of air. They can only take your breath away. I was about to bust in the song, but then I remember, don't. Man has the right to think what he will, to speak what he will, to write what he will, to draw, paint, carve, etch, mold, build as he will, to dress as he will. So basically, you have the right to express your will and desires in any way you see fit in the form of propaganda. So, to speak, to write, to draw, so any form of expression that you could find on these means, you are free to do so. Now, notice it didn't say that you are free to act, so to think a certain idea and then act upon that, because, we need to be careful when it comes to true will. I remember when I first got into Thelema, one of the biggest questions I had was, okay, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Basically, everything is subject to will, so what you will, I guess, is a way of just confusing, I guess, the current version of what we view to be desire with will. But essentially I thought, well, what if someone's will is to, like, be a Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer or something? How do you deal with that level? And then, of course, the thing that always tends to sneak up on me and remind me is common sense. When it comes to working, there are very common themes when it comes to working in a society with other people, and that is, if you have murderous tendencies or these weird deviant tendencies, you tend not to last very long in that environment, or you're not appreciated. So, there are wackadoos out there, and those wackadoos should not be able to do their will. And I know that's basically completely anathema to what we're just reading here, but if there is something wrong with the way you think, and yeah, you're thinking as you will, but that thinking and here we're getting into this weird catch-22 when it comes to this stuff. I guess this is perfectly illustrating the initial conflict I had with Thelema, and that is, it doesn't mean do whatever you want, which that I easily came out. I was like, well, duh, I know that. Just don't do whatever you want. That's self-control. That's very common sense. But then it came to the point, what if the person themselves is just not capable of discerning truth in a way that makes them live in harmony? I guess you could say that. What if someone's will, you can perceive very easily, is not in line with the harmony of the universe? Like, their will is to destroy the universe with fire and kill all humans. There comes a point when your common sense is like, yeah, I'm pretty sure on any level that's not right. So, I guess. I'm not really sure where I went with that. But you can see where, like, the personal interpretation comes into play. These are very simple phrases that Alistair is speaking up here. So let's move on, though. It says, man has the right to love as he will. Take your fill and will of love as ye will, when, where, and with whom ye will. To understand this, though, I believe you have to understand what love is. Love, to me, the best way I can describe love, or I guess the way love was revealed to me, um, magically, I guess, is a big question I always have is upon the dissolution of all reality, when it is just your singular perspective, and you're faced with the nothingness of everything. So essentially, the the true beginning, the true cause of everything is in nothingness, or at least nothing that I can perceive. But then I wonder why I've incarnated, why we live in a world of suffering where other incarnated beings suffering, and then you think, well, it's because through suffering we learn liberation and all this stuff. And it's like, well, why was that necessarily necessary? This great cosmic being with unlimited power, and I wish to manifest in some way. Why not? I mean, it boggles your brain to think why all of this is the way it is. Why we live this reality? Why, if we really are these transcendent spiritual beings, why are we living this very limited experience? And now, of course, there's all kinds of answers to that. Spiritual answers like, well, this is just your physical perspective of things. You have multiple perspectives on multiple planes. You're just not in tune with those. Blah 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 blah. I've heard pretty much all of them. But essentially, when it comes down to it, it becomes very personal. It is, what happened? Why did I do this? Why am I in this cycle? What is going on? And the answer I constantly get is love. And I never get a way of understanding it intellectually, but I get this weird feeling of when you really, really want something, and you have that when you really want something and you have this feeling of connection with it's this magnetic pull that you can almost feel physically. Whenever there's a person you feel an attachment to, it's almost as if an energetic pull between the two of you. What I received was love is kind of like that magnetic pull always exists aside from the source that created everything. Like, love is its own transcendent energy that created the awareness that there is this transcendent energy. It's hard to explain, but essentially it's love is everything. Everything is a modification of love. It's only our ability to perceive those modifications that let us make distinctions between the love and the forms of all these other things. Now, this probably really doesn't make any sense, but essentially it has to do with the way I view love is if you do have a purpose in this incarnation, in this reality, love would be that underlying force that draws you to that thing, that unmistakable desire to unite and then to die. I always view love like love making. It's two individual things violently trying to merge into one to experience ultimate pleasure and bliss. It is the dissolution of the two into the one, into samadhi, into bliss. In the same way, that is what's ultimately supposed to kill you. Because essentially love is the dissolution of ego. The ego is what keeps us from experiencing love in everything that we perceive. And in the dissolution of that ego in lovemaking, we get rid of the perception of self, and we only wish to fill something else. It's like two chalices trying to fill each other. Or the wand and the chalice. It's the wand wishes to be within the chalice, and the chalice wishes to encompass the wand. It's the unity to create one whole. And I think that love in its most extreme form is death, in the sense that to find what's going to ultimately fulfill you and allow it to kill you. And little loves are like little deaths. They are little steps on the road to ultimate liberation. But to love as He will, to be filled with it, with whoever you feel fit. Because ultimately we are beings that have incarnated multiple times. And to experience true love, in my opinion, means connecting with who someone is beyond their physical reality, beyond their physical incarnation. So it's, well, and a lot of that is realizing that who they are beyond their physical incarnation is the same source of which you share, and then finding joy and pleasure in that unity, that you are not separate, that you are two same beings coming together once again in bliss. And you have the right to do that with whoever you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone. I know I keep referring back. I know that's not literally here, but you can just as easily push someone away from truth by hurting them with your own truth as just tempering your actions a bit in words. I think Crowley obviously didn't share that viewpoint, but he also didn't have a whole lot of friends. So, line 5, man has the right to kill those who would thwart these rights. The slaves shall sure serve. Love is the law. Love under will. We're human beings. Since our inception in this world, we have had constant war. From small family tribes warring over land and resources to larger villages and towns and cities also doing the same, to organizations fighting over ideals and causes. Man, if there's one thing that's constant, it's that man is war. Man will war. You have to remember that in every man there is a Gabora, there is a Mars, a martial conflict. There is a battle within every man. But then there's also peace. Remember, we are dual beings. As long as we are dual beings, we'll always have war and peace. And they will always be revolving and dancing around each other. What changes is what man goes to war for. What Crowley is specifically speaking here is the only thing that is lawful, or the only reason that is lawful for another person to kill something else, essentially, is because it does not fall in line with will, or it does not allow others to pursue and fulfill their true will. An example of this would be, so Zafan, you spoke of these other countries where people don't have the level of freedom that we have here. Now, what if that country imposes a level of control of which no one could ever come to liberation and freedom? An example of this would be like Kim Jong-il's Korea, where people literally, what they think, what they say, what they eat, what they drink, everything that we talked about here is subject to a man. Which would be okay if these were willing adults willingly subjugating their wills to another in the form of, say, a guruship or something like that. But this isn't. This is a man imposing violence, using war to impose control on this entire nations of peoples. And because of that, in my opinion, I don't think these peoples can come to truth. For one thing, if you sent them a book of the law and they were caught with it, you'd probably have them and their entire family killed. And you would just have murdered a family. Well, you would have killed a family without noticing it, thus allowing them to not find their true will. So you have to think, well, what if we decide to go to war against Korea and destroy the leader, depose him, and impose a form of governance that would allow this to happen? Would that be lawful under the Lema? Maybe. I don't. These are really tough questions that we have an entire Aeon to figure out, which is awesome. This is where we're literally barely 100 years into this new Aeon, at least in Crowley's perspective. Not astrologically or whatever, but So we're just figuring it out, man. So this is also why we're doing this, to have this dialogue of the Lema, of the new law, of the new Aeon. We are the people that are going to be building the next generation. We are the people that are building the world of which our next incarnations will inhabit. The progression of our species is completely up to us, specifically those among us who are enlightened to the new Aeon. Those among us who are no longer under the control system of previous old Aeon illusion, but are ready to create a new reality with the energies that are now available to us. So yeah, this is our opportunity. So let's have a dialogue about this. So yeah, now, being in Texas, we have pretty good, well, I would say pretty good, but open gun laws. We have open carry. You can buy a gun as long as you're not necessarily a convicted felon. You can buy a firearm, carry it with you, able to protect yourself. In a weird sense, I kind of agree with that. I own a firearm myself, purchased legally, which I am allowed to have because I am not a felon or an ex-convict or anything like that. But I believe in personal responsibility, not relying on others as much as I can. So, say for instance, if something bad were to happen to me, I was in a situation in which violence was imposed upon me in an unlawful manner. I believe that I should have the ability and the right to protect myself in any means possible to preserve my being or to preserve the beings of the people that I love and cherish. Do I believe that you should be allowed to kill other people over, say, property? See, that's an even tougher situation. How does that affect your ability to do your will? Now, of course, if someone's wanting to cut your arms off, to kill you, to physically harm you as much as possible, that's pretty evident that that's going to impose your ability to find and do your true will. And the violence of which that person is committing is probably not going to ultimately allow them to become enlightened either, because that's them just feeding into a cycle of criminality that generally will just keep them bound to just negative things. So, I mean, that makes sense. But what if someone's trying to steal, say, your wallet or some money, things that you can acquire back, things that if you lose wouldn't necessarily inhibit anything? Should you be allowed to kill people for that? That's another question, in my opinion. Maybe not. Legally, you can. So, under the current environment you're in, if you so will, you will not be necessarily legally punished for it. But I think the Celestial Brotherhood might have a word to say with you about, like, hey man, you knew that, that wallet, those credit cards could be canceled, that $50 can be easily replaced. You knew that that guy could have been doing that because he's influenced by drugs or he really, really needs food. You don't know. So the Celestial Brotherhood asks you, so do you honestly think killing this person was the best thing for him and for you? And you say, well, no. Well, that's, in my opinion, the only actual sin you can kind of commit would be to keep a fellow yourself or a fellow human entity or just any entity from evolving. That's basically it. If killing someone liberates them from a cycle of de-evolution, do you think that is lawful? These are questions we need to ask. Now, I've spoken primarily on the surface societal, like, I guess you could say the quick draw reactions people would normally have to reading something like this. Now, of course, these have very deep spiritual underlyings, like, do you have the right to kill anyone who opposes your will? Now, we have to also remember, Crowley used a lot of symbolic language, mainly being when he would talk about slaying a baby, he meant masturbation. So, in a sense, slitting his own throat was watching someone else commit a sexual act in front of him, and while he masturbates. Sorry guys if this is the first time you've heard anything like this. It may not even be true. These are just weird little rumors you hear in Thelemic books and books of mysticism and magic, and people say, oh yeah, I heard this is what Crowley did. He wrote about it in this, and blah blah blah. But you have to, this is a man who speaks, when he says something, he may not necessarily mean what is written on the paper. You have to think. He wrote for people that thought, that were intelligent enough to look beyond the lines. So when we kill, we know, what do we kill with? We stab, we murder. What instrument do we murder with when we have our 4 magical implements? That is the knife or the sword. Sword being to Gabor, which is war, which is vengeance. So that would be to go out and conquer something, maybe physically, and that's the Gabor aspect. They also have the dagger, which is related to thought, so it has to do with individual things that you have created or that you think or say, of which you are willing to kill because it no longer serves a purpose or it now inhibits your ability to do your will. That's more of what I'm thinking he's talking about, in the fact that, yes, you have the right to think how you will, which is what he had spoke of before that, but then also to kill the things that don't. Part of learning magic is the ability to banish or invoke entities, and also to kill entities, in the sense that, say for instance, you would summon an airy spirit who has been like a thought, a persistent thought that has been troubling you. You take your dagger, you draw a pentagram of air, maybe associated to what you think that spirit's attached to, do the sign of an enter, banish it away, use your dagger to physically kill it if you want to, or not physically, but magically kill it, and then that instilled with your intention to destroy that pattern of thought would then murder a thought. Now you have to remember, in magic, entities, spirits, beings, and everything like that, you're to perceive them in a sense as real. So when you're in your magical circle and you are summoning a spirit, say a spirit of air, and this spirit of air has been troubling you, you are to perceive it as an actual spirit. Like in this room, if that spirit were to decide, like for instance, if you didn't have your circle of protection, and if you didn't bind that spirit, say in a triangle or a crystal or a pentagram or anything like that, essentially in that framework of thought, that spirit could do damage to you in that magical situation. That's the viewpoint you take at that particular moment, so that you give it some sort of power, so that then you can take the power away from it and give it back to yourself. So however you want to view it, but essentially you're still doing an act of violence towards a being, in a sense. You're killing it. So it could just say something like that. Because I like to think when Crowley speaks, he's speaking to a bunch of people who... He's speaking to people who, one, he said Thelema isn't just for magic people. The law is for all. Remember that. The law is for all. So, yes, these surface meanings are relevant to the vast majority of people. These are, now you think, oh, all these seem so self-relevant. I mean, these are all so evident. These are what we're fighting for now. I know a lot of people say around my age, share my, I guess, type of demographic, would probably have similar viewpoints to this, ultimate freedom and liberty. But then you have the underlying spiritual implications to these lines, which I believe is every person's right to then go ahead and further study. But, you know, we do need to be able to present this in a way to where we can speak to anybody without using mumbo-jumbo magic talk. But we also need to be a way to speak to that mumbo-jumbo magic talk, because it's also that. So yeah, so let's move on. That was Liber OZ. Let's move on to our tarot card reading, and this will be the end of the podcast. So yesterday we had Ten of Wands oppression. I thought about the meaning I gave to it later, and I feel like, yeah, it's pretty good, at least in my thing. I mean, this is all very personal. You know, you have all these books on tarot that give you all these correspondences for the cards and situations and personality types and stuff like that. But you have to remember, ultimately, that's someone else's life experience being funneled into those cards. These cards are very, very unique to the individual. in a sense of how you read them and interpret them. Now, the symbols on the cards and the correlations between the symbols, those are essentially pretty set in stone. Like the tower card related to Pe, you wouldn't necessarily want to separate those things. But as far as what the tower image and those energies translate to you, that's up to you. So I generally don't tend to read a lot of tarot books. The only one I actually get into is Book of Thoth. So Crowley's Book of Thoth. Mainly because it gives a more expanded viewpoint of the symbolism of the cards. It will give at times maybe a little bit of like divination aids, but even Crowley was pretty open about, divination is you need to inject your own kind of meanings to these cards. So I felt in that respect I did good. But I also see the deficit in doing this for an audience, that they're going to have different opinions. But I think that's the beauty of it. They see my opinion, and then they'll see their opinion, and then they can kind of relate those two. So they'll have fire, water, combine those two, let them react to form a third condition, being truth. So that's all I'm doing, guys. Just bring you guys some tidbits of truth. All right. We have the star. Guys, I can't make this shit up. So yeah. This is the star card. Whoops. That's the star card. Yeah, this is awesome. That's the moon goddess, the night goddess Nuit, in a sense. Yeah. Wow. So we got the star card. So this card is related to Aquarius. We are in the age of Aquarius. Okay. And attributed to the letter He. Now, after I just said the symbols and correspondence are generally set in stone, except for Zodi and He, which Crowley, for the new Aeon, switched. There's a whole huge explanation for that with all kinds of diagrams and things like that. Lon Milo, in his book, Understanding the Thoth Tarot, gives a really good explanation of this. Crowley tries to give an explanation, I believe, in Magic and Theory and Practice. It's difficult to understand, at least for me. But Lon's description is really good, really easy to understand. Like I said, the guy's amazing at making normal people understand things. But we got the star. So the star card, at least to me, in my personal conception, reveals essentially this is who I am. So I have a pouring forth of influence onto my life, and then an issuing out of influence from my life. I myself am the star of my reality, Nuit being the one who is constantly feeding me these existences. For this particular reading in this podcast, I would say, let me go ahead and invoke a little bit of transcendent energy, and then we'll see what I get from that. I invoke the come, oh angel, reveal secret mysteries of this card. Goddess Nuit, I hold thee in my hands. Reveal to me these secrets. Reveal to me the light of this star. So basically what I'm getting is that this podcast itself, as long as it becomes a continual cycle of creation, much like the issuing forth of stars from birth nebulas, I will reveal little facets of myself, piece by piece, gem by gem, spark by spark. I will reveal the truth of my destiny and help others to do the same, that my star will become a light to other stars. My trajectory and gravity will pull others towards the truth, the light, and Thelema. Through devotion to the goddess Nuit and the recognizing of everyone else's rights and liberties, the ability for them to do their true wills, that all of this is a great sign, a great tapestry upon my life. And that as long as I pursue my will, as long as I pursue ever brightening my star, I will allow others to do the same, and I will inspire others to do the same. For this is where my heart lies, and this is where the fire, the very nuclear reactor of my soul, is enlivened. And that is within the enlivenment of all human species, the further evolution of our kind. Come, O energies of the new aeon. Come, O Aquarius. Yeah, that's what I got, guys. Not sure what we're going to be doing the next podcast. Maybe we'll talk about some magic, spirits, something. Maybe we'll have a guest. I really want to try and get a guest. But until next time, guys, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.